Okay, so this is a YouTube video which codes 3 questions. Questions 8.9, 8.10 and 8.11 in a book called Python Crash Course. On page 146 in chapter 8, which deals with functions. So this question here, 8.9 or 8.9, chapter 8.9, make a list containing a series of short text messages. So here's a list there's the list of short text messages. It's pointing towards text, the variable text. Pass the list to a function called showMessages. So this is the function, defining the function showMessages, and this is a parameter. This describes what the function does. It prints each text message in the list. Pass the list to a function called showMessages, which prints each text message. So for each text in texts, which is this list here, print the element text. So here I'm calling the function showMessages, and I'm passing the function text, which comes from this variable here, which points back to the list. So if I run this, it should print each text message in a list. So that's what it does. Buy milk, visit shops, say hello, she was nice. So now it gets a little bit more complicated. Start with a copy of your program from exercise 8.9. Write a function called sendMessages that prints each text message and moves each message to a new list called sentMessages as it's printed. After calling the function, print both of your lists to make sure the messages were moved correctly. So let's have a look at what I've done here. So the function is called sendMessages, which is a bit different from showMessages. And what I've done is it prints each text message and moves it to sentMessages as it's being printed. That's what I think the question asks. That's what it wants. So for that, I'm not going to print each text message again because I've already done that here. I could just copy this here and paste that up here, but I'm not going to do that because you won't be able to see it as well. I have to zoom out more then. So print each text message, well, we've done that already, and move it to sentMessages as it's being printed. For that, we create a while loop. So while text is true, right? So we can ignore all this. It's a function. So if I ran it without that, it won't come up with an error or anything because all I've written is a function. So while text is true, now an empty list is false, but this list here is true because it's not an empty list. While text is true, for each element, in the list texts, move. So then what I'm doing then is I go pop each text. So from texts, this list here, pop it out. So it starts from the end. She was nice, said hello, visit shops, milk, and point that object, this object here, to the variable move. So then move contains all the popped elements from the list texts. The next line of code, I write sent messages dot append that move. So every time I pop an element from the end, 1, 2, 3, 4, it'll append it to sent messages. Right? Now, none of this has to exist. It does have to exist for the function to actually do something, but it doesn't have to exist for the function to be a working function. Like I deleted all this before, delete it again, and I'll run it. It still doesn't come up with an error or anything because the function works. So it's just looking for data in order to make the function work. And here's the data, right? So here has got a big long list. This could be a million lists long. This could be a million elements long. But here it's only 4. And so the text messages are these. They haven't been sent yet. But when they do, they're going to be stored in this variable, sent messages. So this is sent messages is an empty list because we want to hold, we need somewhere to move text to. And we're moving texts to sent messages. So if I insert this data at line 12 and 13 and I just print it out, what do we get? Well, we get text contains a copy of that, and sent messages are nothing, right? We haven't got nothing's been transferred from text messages into sent messages yet because we haven't called the function, right? We haven't called the function yet. So let's call the function. The function's called send messages. So here I've called the function and I've passed the function texts, and texts points to the list, and because of that I've passed the argument texts to the parameter sent. I could also call that text, I guess, but in this case you call it anything I want. I call it X and it'll still work. I call it sent, I call it X, I could call it Mercury, Pluto, whatever. It'll still run this code. So the argument texts is passed to send messages, and it runs it in this while loop. So now, and then here I've just, so in this first part here, from here, I've just printed out these two things. Now I'm going to run the function, and then I'm going to print out whether or not the function has worked by showing whether or not the list in texts has all transferred over to sent messages. So what I'm aiming for is for sent messages to have all the text messages, and for text to be an empty list. I'm just transferring this here, each one, into this here. That's all I'm doing, which means that this is going to have all those elements in it, and text is going to be an empty list. And I'm doing that by using the send messages function, which I've created, and I'm proving that it's transferred by printing out the variables again. So I've printed, in this instance, it was printed out, and you saw this here. Text contains that. Sent messages are empty, and then after calling the function, I'm hoping to see that the other way around. So let's run this code and see what happens. Okay, so here you can see that what we aimed for, we have hit. So text now contain an empty list, and sent messages contain the elements of this list. Now notice that they're in reverse order, because when you use the pop method, it takes the last element of the list and goes backwards. That's how it works. It doesn't go the first element and go the other way. It actually goes backwards. Now you can fix that, but I'm not going to go into that here just yet. But you can fix that, and I'll show you one way of fixing that using a method soon. So now we have the last question. Start with your work from exercise 8.10. All right, so 8.10. Right. So this is almost the same. All I've done is change the description of what the function does. Start with your work from exercise 8.10. Call the function send messages with a copy of the list of messages. After calling the function, print both of your lists to show that the original list has retained its messages. So this has to move each text message from text to messages, but then it has to show each list and show each list with text being a copy and sent messages having transferred having been transferred the messages from texts. So same code again, same thing, but the difference with this one is with the previous one, it only had one parameter, whereas this one has two parameters, text and send. Now I can delete send and it'll still work. So I actually will delete send, because believe it or not, if you delete send, it'll actually work, because all you need to do is link it all back to texts. Anyway, all I've done is create a copy of texts, and I've transferred everything in text to sent messages. So let's run this. Well, it doesn't work. Well, for simplicity, I'll just keep sends back in there. Let's run this again. Right, you can delete sent, but I also have to delete sent messages, and then it will work again. But text contains buy milk, said hello, she was nice, visit shops, right? Sent messages are buy milk, said hello, she was nice, and visit shops. Now, the way that I've ordered these, because before in the last one, they're all unordered, or backwards rather, so just use the sort method. And that may or may not be the right thing to do, but for this little tiny program, it's okay. So that's how I did that. Now if I wanted to delete, the sent isn't connected to anything, right? So I can get rid of that. And as long as I get rid of this one as well, no, actually I do think, let's see what happens. Yeah, so that still works. That still works. Because sent messages is not required to be a parameter. It's just not a parameter of this function. Although it does link into the list down here. So there we go.